There is a comic book out there that's so bad, so controversial, so disgusting that it's basically spoken about with hushed tones. It's called Our Love is Real by Sam Humphries, who some of you may know from Marvel and DC Comics. Probably not, because he doesn't do very well, but he has been gainfully employed by the big two over the last decade or so. And this is the comic that actually broke open the glass ceiling for Sam Humphries to get into Marvel Comics. And I read it. I thought that Perch and Sparrow and some of my other friends were exaggerating about how bad this comic book is. It's easily the worst comic book I've ever read in my life. If I ever say this is the worst comic I've ever read in the future, I didn't mean it. I'm lying. I'm telling you right now, because Our Love is Real is the worst comic book in my lifetime. I still can't believe it actually exists. Well, I mean, I guess I can believe it actually exists, but I can't believe even like Image Comics published it. But this is a strange story about how one of the most disgusting, weird, terrible comic books in the history of the industry secured Sam Humphries a gig on the Ultimates of all things. Sam Humphries' comic Our Love is Real might be the most absurd comic ever created. The story revolves around a dystopian future where traditional romance has vanished, replaced instead by relationships between humans and animals, plants, and even crystals. Yes, you heard that correctly. A cop romantically involved with his dog is the protagonist. This intentionally shocking premise is so far beyond the pale, it's almost impossible to imagine any publisher touching it, let alone what is mainstream and family-friendly as Marvel Comics. Now, obviously, Marvel didn't publish it, Image did, but this is the comic book that got Sam Humphries into Marvel and eventually DC Comics. And it's very hard to describe. You know, you do get the feeling that you could be demonetized by actually describing this comic book. It's so weird. There's this cop, and he is very proud that he's a mammal lover because he and his dog are in a loving, monogamous relationship. There's a bunch of riots caused by veggie lovers, apparently people that have sex with vegetables. And he's putting down these riots, and he meets this lady, and he's taken aback by her and her aura. And it turns out she's a mineral lover. She's sleeping with crystals. And he's very confused about himself. Eventually, he comes back, tries to kiss this lady. Turns out it's actually a dude. And then he tries to stop a robbery, but it was really that lady liberating crystals that she wants to have sex with, I guess. And then she murders him, and his spirit goes inside a crystal. And then this dude that looked like a woman, but is apparently a dude, keeps having sex with him.
What? What the fuck?
And that's the end of the book. And that is real. Like, Our Love is Real is a real book. And that is the fucking premise. How does this get you a job at Marvel? And it's not like it was like a big critical success or anything like that. As expected, Our Love is Real stirred significant controversy upon its release. Even within indie comic circles known for edgy and boundary-pushing stories, many readers found Humphries' concept deeply disturbing and offensive. Comments range from outright disgust to accusations of shock value exploitation, with some readers going as far as labeling its content as pedophile-level offensive. Despite a small group appreciating its satirical intent, the overwhelming majority saw the comic as a tasteless, divisive stunt clearly meant to provoke rather than entertain. And you go back and you read these interviews from Sam Humphries, like, oh, this is like my thesis on the war on AIDS that was going on in like the 80s. And I grew up in the 80s, and I remember AIDS being a big deal, and, you know, Magic Johnson and all that kind of stuff, and people were dying all over the place from AIDS. But I don't understand how that gets you to dog fucker. You know what I mean? Like, to bestiality? Like, it's so weird. And I think it's supposed to be satirical about people judging others, like, for their sexual partners or whatever. But 12 years later, 13 years later, it reads far less satirical because there are people out there proudly proclaiming their love for dogs and crystals and vegetables and basically anything that they can get their hands on and essentially have sex with at this point. So really, rather than being a satirical commentary on the prudish nature of American culture, it basically was the canary in the coal mine explaining to people how far this kind of degeneracy really was going to go within a very short period. It's only 13 years. And I'm still, I don't know. Can't believe I read that book. To make matters more baffling, Our Love is Real wasn't even a widely read comic. Initially self-published, it had a minuscule print run of just 300 copies. It briefly became an indie buzz topic and got picked up for a modest second printing by Image Comics, but it remained a niche curiosity, never approaching mainstream appeal or broad readership. Marvel typically hires creators who've demonstrated consistent storytelling ability or achieved critical acclaim with wider audiences, yet Humphries had none of these credentials, just a shock comic known more for controversy than craftsmanship, and it's not a very good comic book. It's not well constructed. There's not a good, strong point in there. There are definitely some shocking moments that you're not really expecting. When you see the cover and the dude is firmly planted behind the dog, and you're like, where you really taking that one pretty literally there, dude? And you see it, but it wasn't a wide success. It was not Mirage Comics, in a house in Ohio, creating TMNT that became this big cultural phenomenon, and everybody, including Marvel Comics, would have been stupid for not offering those guys a job. They had created something that was culturally significant, and this hadn't. He didn't create anything that was good. It wasn't critically lauded. It didn't sell a lot of comic books. Sure, it made buzz, but it made buzz because it was about a dude that fucked dogs and was really happy to kind of brag about it. And then when you think about what's going on at Marvel Comics at the time, when he gets this gig, after the book comes out around 2011, 2012, that's when Marvel hires him. The timing of Humphries' Marvel hiring is equally perplexing because in 2012, Marvel was aggressively pursuing mainstream audiences following the blockbuster success of the Avengers. Their Marvel Now initiative, aimed explicitly at attracting new family-friendly readers, the move to bring Humphries aboard, fresh off a comic celebrated for its taboo content, seemed completely at odds with their stated goal of mass market accessibility. Hiring a writer associated with bestiality satire at the very height of their Disney-backed push for broad appeal feels like a bizarre, inexplicable editorial decision. And they did, quite frankly, make a lot of these bizarre editorial hiring decisions at the time, but nothing is more inexplicable than fucking Sam Humphries. The Avengers ended up being the greatest proof of concept ever, basically proving that the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the shared universe was going to be the biggest thing in movies for the next decade or so. They made money hand over fist. You would think that they would be looking for creators who would make things for mass appeal to later on convert into movies. And then they turn to the dude making bestiality comic books. I can't for the life of me understand what Joe Quesada and Axel Alonso and Dan Buckley were thinking at the time, allowing these kind of decisions, these hiring decisions to happen. Certainly by that point, Marvel had basically taken all the hot indie creators out there, and they were probably looking for more because they weren't really creating their own new stars. They were going out there and finding their stars on the indie scene. But at this point, I guess they had taken so many that all that was left were people like Sam Humphries, who had essentially just embarrassed himself in the comic book industry by putting out a book this bad. And it certainly didn't turn out very good in the long term for Marvel Comics, their fans, DC Comics, who we went over to, because ultimately Humphries' career at Marvel reflected exactly what you might expect given his background: unimpressive and quickly forgettable. He received a huge initial opportunity stepping in for Jonathan Hickman on the Ultimates comic, but his run was immediately criticized as a letdown, lacking the creativity and depth readers expected. Later series such as Avengers AI failed commercially and critically. Humphries never delivered a breakout story or memorable run at Marvel. The absurdity isn't just that Marvel hired a creator known exclusively for pushing shock content. It's that after such a controversial hire, he made no significant impact whatsoever, leaving audiences scratching their heads about Marvel's decision-making process. And it is clear as day that Marvel Comics thought they had their next Jonathan Hickman or Rick Remender because, his first project out of the gate is the Ultimates, but he also ends up taking over for Uncanny X-Force after Remender. And Remender had definitely done some risque things on the indie scene before he arrived at Marvel, but he was always talented. You could tell that he knew how to write comic book stories. He knew how to pace his story. He knew how to get his points across. He knew how to develop characters, get really big character moments. You certainly saw that with Jonathan Hickman when he was on the indie scene, Brian Michael Bendis before that. But that was never there for Humphries, but they tried to treat him like he was those guys. And obviously it blew up in their faces. They never got a major hit out of him. I think the last thing he did was it Tournament of Champions? I think he's coming back for something else, or maybe he has recently. But it's Sam Humphries, so you don't even pay it any mind because he's one of the worst writers in all of comic books. And the weird thing is he proved that in 2011 when he wrote Our Love is Real. He was just a bad writer. The weirdest thing, I guess, for Marvel in this is that the best stuff he ever did really was at DC. He actually has a pretty decent Nightwing story, probably the best thing he's ever done. And then he did have a couple of like Green Lantern story, you know, the series that was starring Jess Cruz and Simon Baz. Like they weren't really good, but they weren't awful either. And that's about as good as you could expect out of a writer like Sam Humphries. But the fact that Marvel ever decided, after reading Our Love is Real about the dog lover, that this was the dude that was going to continue like the indie comic writer push at Marvel Comics to really blow up their audience, just shows you just how baffling of a time it was. They really dropped the ball in so many ways, you know, replacing all of their mainline heroes. Basically at the height of the popularity of the Avengers, they replaced everybody out there, but they also went out there and scoured the market for non-talents like Sam Humphries, who certainly made an impact and made some noise by making a bestiality comic book, but it wasn't even good. It wasn't even interesting. It's just really, really terrible. And it's definitely one of the more interesting stories I ever covered here in comic books. I hadn't read the book. I'd had people talk to me about it. I decided to check it out myself, and I was like, how did this guy get a gig out of this? I don't know. But it really does show you just how screwed up Marvel Comics were at the time, and I just don't think they've really even recovered from stupid ideas like that. That's just me personally. If you do appreciate this kind of coverage of comic books, shining a light on one of the weirdest fucking stories of all times right here on Think Critical YouTube, and you would like to be part of the mission of talking apparently about really strange stuff, the place to support us is Think Critical Patreon. There's a button right here. There's a link in the video description. I do hope to see you very, very soon. We'll talk about better comic books than this, I promise.